Memory transcription subject, Onso, Yodel technical specialist. Date, standardized human time, March 7, 2137. The auburn hair, cut just above her shoulders, was all I could see while staring intently at the back of Samantha's head. The Aussie UN guard was brewing her daily cup of coffee, a routine I'd observed for multiple days. I had a perfect plan to spur her into action. When she turned around, my analysis of human behavior was conclusive on exactly what poked their buttons. The Terran turned around to find a Yodel hovering behind her, and I struck a pose as soon as her jade-green gaze narrowed. I tilted my head, ensuring that my eyes stretched as wide as possible. My ears slanted inward enough to touch, and my tail wagged in half-hearted motions. "The fuck are you doing?" Samantha hissed. "Not even using your words? You want coffee, brew your own. You know how." I emitted the whine of a wounded animal, and lowered my head in the saddest way possible. My eyes shifted upward briefly, gauging the human's reaction. "I'm not doing it, you lazy fuck." The human waved a dismissive hand at me, and crossed her arms. "Try to manipulate me with the puppy dog face. Unbelievable. I'll tell you this once, you're playing a dangerous game, mate." I struggled to maintain my act. "Coffee? Please. I have to strain on my hind legs because of your counter height. I'll get you a bloody step stool to stand on, but I'm not making it for you." "Who taught you this?" "Knock it off, 'cause you're not getting coffee out of it." "Hey, come on." A tall soldier with angular features pointed a hand at me. I vaguely remembered his name as Frank. "Give the space capybara some coffee. You're making him sad." "Fuck no. You're so keen on it, then you wait on him hand and foot." Sensing that I had a new mark, I wagged my tail happily and started bouncing up and down. Frank pressed a hand to his heart, cooing at me. A disgusted Samantha stomped off, carrying her own coffee to an empty table. There was a hint of a smirk on her lips, though she attempted to mask it. I flicked my pupils in the direction of the machine, and returned to shameless begging. It was mind-boggling how easy it was to influence the so-called predators. Smug satisfaction filled my chest as the newcomer hopped to it. "Ah, you poor thing. That mean lady didn't want to share, but Uncle Frankie's got you." The aroma wafted into the air as it brewed, and I could already feel the pick-me-up working its way through my bloodstream. "Do you want sugar, cupcake?" I imitated a human nod, in case he turned around. "Please." "Okay. What else do we got for the precious here, non-dairy creamer?" "Sure. Thanks. Any time. Lordy, you're adorable as those Gojid kids." "It's not fair." My mask slipped for a half-second, wondering which Gojid kids Frank was talking about. Had he been on the ground during the cradle's fall? Regardless, I couldn't afford to get too chatty, given that I slated to help out with maintenance soon. I loved tinkering with machines, and there were always minor repairs and calibrations needed during transit. It was an extra duty I was happy to volunteer myself for. The computer had alerted us to a nanometers-wide hull breach, right beneath the drive core. It could weaken the load-bearing structure if left unchecked, and unfortunately, that area of the ship was only accessible from the outside. By the time we stop outside Kolshan borders and await orders, I need to be ready to venture out on a little spacewalk. It'll be wonderfully quiet. Frank poured the coffee into a disposable cup, stirred a packet of sugar into it, and then dispensed a helping of creamer to make it taste more like a treat. The Terran slipped the drink into a sleeve so I wouldn't burn my paw pads too. My begging act ended the second it was transferred into my grasp. I scurried off after a brief ear flick of acknowledgement. What else could I get humans to do with that routine? Outside of my areas of interest, there were quite a few tasks I'd be delighted to shirk. This was an eye-opening discovery that I needed to experiment with further. "Proud of yourself, you little rascal?" Sam grumbled, as I approached her table. Didn't even tell the guy thanks. I slurped down a mouthful of the coffee. An ear flick is thanks. I'll be telling Tyler about this juvenile stunt. It's not acceptable behavior. I think me taking advantage of humans being suckers is more acceptable than Sovlin inventing new forms of racism. The Terran snorted. Point taken. I still think you're a jackass. No, I'm a yodel. Oh, fuck you. Fuck you too. Humph. I guess this is as good as alien interaction gets, a mutual volley of fuck yous. We created a nice bonding ritual here. But on a more serious note, I was surprised to see you return for this stint. Carlos seemed more attached to Sovlin than you, yet you're both along for the ride. I don't dislike Baldy, but I didn't tag along for him. Melbourne doesn't exist anymore, I have nothing to return to. I'm here, 'cause it's all I got, hunting the Kolshians down. Carlos is the one who probably came out of loyalty, maybe even brotherly love for Sovlin, and he's also the one you should have pulled your coffee-begging act on. That might be a good idea, if Frank's not around. I got a feeling he won't mind helping out again. Samantha rolled her eyes, sipping at her coffee at a leisurely pace. Meanwhile, I began chugging my latte with gluttonous energy. Her binocular gaze shifted to the droplets dripping off my chin. The human shook her head in disappointment. I gulped down the last of my drink, and slammed the empty cup down. The female primate wordlessly passed me a napkin, which I used to clean my snout. Peacekeeper Harris seemed to be biting back a comment on my table manners. I pitched my trash into a waste bin. Just out of curiosity, Sam, how close was my begging to working? That will never work on me, the human muttered. Why not? I thought I got the pitiful eyes down pat. You want to see it again? Fuck no. Scram, onso. You did feel us drop out of warp, huh? Go be useful. I gave an innocent wave, and Samantha purposefully turned her body away from me. Chuckling to myself, I skipped from the rec room to the nearest airlock. It took some persistence to wriggle into the Yodel spacesuit. With multiple sapient coalition species among the ship's crew, the United Nations carried vac suits tailored to each race listed aboard, with at least a few spares in case of defects. I pulled up a small readout on my wrist, syncing it to my holopad. A beacon showed the exact location the computer had given for the breach, so that just left ejecting to the ship's exterior to complete the repairs. I ran through the required visual 360 to ensure that no other people were within the airlock, before sealing the compartment. Various tools were already affixed to my belt, but I did the diligence of triple tug checking the tether hooked onto it as well. Once all items were confirmed to be secure, I held my paw over the atmosphere catch button. After the hatch cycled, I gave myself a slight push into the starry expanse. My suited form drifted over the body of the ship in the drive's direction. It was a short glide, and the handholds distributed along key paths could steer me if additional momentum was needed. I relished the feeling of weightlessness, surveying the serene panorama out of my periphery. My sense of utter insignificance blossomed, with only a few layers of fabric between me and the everlasting void. There was only the faint glimmer of distant starlight, rendering the metal of the ship's hull a shadowy slope. Its entire length stretched for over 100 meters, leaving plenty of space for humans to tuck powerful weaponry. I'd chosen an airlock a short distance away from the drive compartment on purpose. It was best not to waste thruster gas or oxygen, in case it was needed in a future emergency. Tapping the microphone button on my wrist readout, I transmitted a message back to the ship. I'm 30 seconds out from the repair site. This will be patched in no time, I said. Samantha's voice filtered into my helmet. Copy that, Onso. I'll stay on this frequency and be waiting outside the airlock, as requested. Just don't expect a picnic lunch when you return. Pretzel sticks and a jar of peanut butter will do. Well, you got two perfectly good legs, and you fucking know where to find whatever food your conniving heart desires. Now get off this channel, less you got any official business. Right. Well, I officially want off. I tugged on my tether, slowing my glide and directing myself toward the source of the hull breach. It was nearly impossible to see with the naked eye, but the above-expected dip in ship oxygen levels substantiated the computer's findings. A moment's inspection identified the breach, which revealed itself as a subtle line of differently colored metal. I popped the can of sealant off my belt, causing it to float up slightly. It had its own tether attaching it to my suit. After filling the microscopic hole, I covered it with a colored patch that fused itself into the hull. The simple handiwork solved the problem without a hitch, until we could seek a thorough repair. I tugged on my tether, propelling myself back toward the airlock. It was rare that spacewalks were necessary for repairs, since most areas were accessible from the interior. However, issues in general were becoming a common experience during our voyage. This warship had seen significant wear and tear, so even with Earth's desperation for artillery, I wondered if the United Nations would retire it soon. This hasn't come close to a worst-case scenario. When unrepairable damage was sustained during combat, sometimes entire compartments had to be sealed off. I was pleased that my initiative had saved us from taking such steps. My paw drifted to the microphone button on my wrist, tempted to jab Samantha with my status report. I shouldn't have said the word pretzels aloud. I was joking, but now I actually want them. They are good gaming food, if we'll stay put here long enough for a session with Tyler. My nostrils twitched with amusement. Hey, Sammy. Surprisingly, the human didn't cut me off to strike down that nickname. Anso, get back here now. Whether the repairs are done or not. Already moving. What's wrong? Energy signatures out of nowhere. Bastards must have predicted our course, and that we'd stop before the disruptor buoys. I think they powered down their fucking ships and parked them outside their own territory. You know, to ambush us, 'cause there's hostiles practically right next to us. You don't want to be out there if we have to take evasive maneuvers or get hit. I got it, and I was already heading back. Double time it, you crazy fucking marsupial. I'll be right here. I powered up my jet thrusters, accelerating my movement toward the airlock. With visibility no longer being an issue for stealth reasons, given that the Kolshians were already upon us, our warship powered on bright exterior lights to illuminate nearby hostiles. One beam struck the hull of a foe, which was gliding adjacent to us at minimum power emissions. They'd snuck into position without attracting attention. Rather than striking us down, they appeared to be preparing to insert a boarding party. Their craft latched onto our exterior before my watching eyes. I hated the Kolshians, but I couldn't deny it was a bold move to board a human ship. That would, at the least, catch the primates off their game. The United Nations had shown they could adapt under pressure. However, the Shadow Fleet's foot soldiers had yet to clash with Earthling forces. While the Terrans were skilled against other foes, it was unknown how they stacked up against trained Kolshians or how well they could defend their warships from intruders. I needed to get inside, obtain a weapon, and ensure that I wasn't separated from the other troopers. I sucked in a sharp breath, seeing the airlock come into view. Sam, it's me. Open the door, now. I turned my shoulder inward, and hurtled toward the still-shut inner door. I braced myself to slam into it at high velocity, though I knew obtaining injuries in a clunky spacesuit wasn't ideal. Mercifully, my tail latched onto a paw hold, halting my momentum. I could see the whites of Sam's eyes through the window slit to the control room. As the outer airlock clicked shut on her command, artificial gravity returned to the room. I rolled onto the floor for a rough landing, feeling the definite stings of new bruises taking root. Adrenaline helped me bounce to my feet without slowing, and I rushed to shed the suit. Samantha unsealed the inner compartment, and shoved a sidearm into my grasp. Take it. We need to work our way back to a choke point, or if all else fails, hole up in the bridge with the officers and a security detail. Let's go, Onso, now. I'm going as fast as I can, I panted, spilling out of the suit like potatoes tumbling from a sack. What if we get cut off from the core of the ship? Then we're on our own. Every soldier had orders to fall back. Hell, the fucking ship might be put on lockdown, and we'd be stuck. Why did you wait for me? You should have saved yourself. I don't usually leave my squad mates behind, not if I like them, anyway. It is what it is. We move out and we deal with it. Samantha didn't wait for further questions, jogging down the hallway to the rec room. I recalled exactly where the Kolshan soldiers' insertion point had been. Since I'd sized them up while returning toward the airlock, I knew enemies would be found in the direction we were heading now. It might serve us to reverse course, but given our orders, it could leave us stranded from our comrades. The key points for the United Nations to hold were the bridge controls and the armory. Everything else could be sealed off to avoid any funny business. The warp drive, as was obvious during my spacewalk, was inaccessible from the inside. Sparks were visible further down the corridor, the telltale sign of the Kolshans scorching an incision into the hull. Samantha crouched behind a table for a moment, weighing her options. The human and I were up against an entire boarding party, and I knew that ended with both our brains splattered on the wall. There wasn't time to book it past the entry point before they made it inside. The UN soldier also opted to fight another day, slinking back in the direction we'd come. I had no idea how we could hope to make it out in one piece, other than attempting to dodge Kolshan sweeps. How good at stealth and hiding are humans? I've read a bit about guerrilla warfare, but I don't think hit-and-run tactics work in close-quarters combat. The primate and I ducked around a corner past the airlock compartment, and the clang of the wall coming down echoed behind us. From the footsteps I heard clashing with the floor, there must have been dozens of Kolshans. It was unthinkable to peek back and find out for certain. I warred with my nerves, as it sank in that we were cornered and hopelessly outgunned. It had always been my impression that Tyler and I would have each other's backs, but now, I just hoped my buddy was safer than I was. It was a fair assumption he was holed up in the bridge with the other officers. I needed to survive on my own, if nothing else, as a "fuck you" to everyone who called the Yodel primitives. That was the Kolshan's rhetoric, and I wasn't going to let them put me down like the animal they thought I was. A sharp-witted human like Samantha might scrounge up some options for us. I shuddered to think what would happen to her, if the boarding party was able to capture a predator alive. Milo's cured Earthlings were experimented on, and had their central nervous systems drugged to senselessness just like me. I wouldn't wish that existence on my worst enemy. My grip became more secure on the firearm, and resolution took over my mind. If there was no escape for me, I planned to go down fighting instead of submitting to a fate of that sort. With any luck, the Terrans would figure out a way to clear the intruders from our warship before it came to such a drastic ultimatum. The push toward Alpha certainly hadn't started off as humanity intended. Memory transcription subject, Onso, Yodel technical specialist. Date, standardized human time, March 7, 2137. Samantha Harris had the bright idea to try to set up as many traps as possible, and also suggested silencing our electronic devices. The last thing we needed was to receive a communique from our officers that tipped the Kolshans off to our position. Humans might be excellent marksmen, but they weren't able to take on a solo mission against 15 enemies, regardless of what their video games might suggest. That was a power fantasy if I'd ever seen one, rather than a plausible demonstration of their actual abilities. As for myself, the hasty Yodel training that I'd received had been enough for me to hit a target downrange with a firearm. It had served well on Silas, but that had been a different scenario from close-quarters combat. "Do you think the others are safe on the bridge?" I messaged Sam over our text comlink. The human's green eyes turned toward me for a moment, before she typed a response. "Sovlin's racism is so thick that it'll keep the squids out." I shoved my paw into my mouth, muffling my laughter. It had once been offensive how derogatory that Gojid was toward Yodel, humans, and many other species, but I'd realized by now that bigotry was embedded into his every waking thought. Not that I'd wish for Sovlin to be in grave peril, isolated from the rest of the crew, but I almost wished the heroic captain was at my side. He was a renowned strategist capable of routing the Arxer with a Federation crew, and his bullheadedness rendered him defiant in combat. Short of Tyler having to watch my back, I would have felt more serenity with someone I'd been in ground action with before. Sam was a competent soldier, but I couldn't predict her moves or her strengths. Likewise, she has no idea about how I react during bullets flying scenarios. It was noble of her not to leave me behind, but I'm sure she has mixed feelings about only having a herbivore at her side. I'll have to prove that I'm not dead weight all over again. Thinking about what my best contributions would be, I tapped into the ship's security feeds so we could keep tabs on our enemy's movements. The Kolshians had split into two teams, with the smaller contingent sweeping the corridors away from the bridge. The hostiles were wearing envirosuits, so venting the atmosphere was rendered ineffective. Sealed bulkheads had come down outside the central areas, which would take significant time to cut down. Those were designed to contain fires, or to keep out intruders. In our central hub, I could see the bridge personnel by the officers toting high-powered rifles, as well as Tyler, Carlos, and Sovlin in deep conversation by the sensors station. I hoped they weren't plotting anything too nonsensical, but that wasn't my concern right now. Machines and technology were my specialization, so it occurred to me that I could tap into the automated weaponry built into the vessel. I didn't want to step on toes, if our commanding officers were planning to commandeer the fortifications to their directives, but I knew I could allocate those resources to my advantage. Assuming I received permission, the guided turrets and wall-mounted defenses could be turned against any encroaching enemies. Samantha was waving at me to hurry, so I fired off a typewritten message to the comm station as I ran. The Terran shoved me through an open maintenance access panel, then began spilling liquid across the floor. Peacekeeper Harris had snatched a massive jug of water meant for the coffee pot, back at the kitchen, and was now using it to coat the floor in life-giving fluids. Was her idea of a trap to make the ground slippery? As amusing as it would be to see the Kolshians losing their footing, that was a minor annoyance at best. I could see the telltale wicked smirk on her face, however, and decided to trust her machinations. If anyone could make the basic elements of carbon-based life deadly, it was a human. Permission granted, Onso, and good luck, the comm station had transmitted in response to my request. Utilize the resources near your location for any tactical advantage. Neutralize as many enemies as you can. The defense we're mounting will focus on the area around the bridge. The United Nations cannot afford to lose control of a nuclear-armed warship. This would be an excellent way to make it look like humanity was attacking innocent worlds, or that they were behind any other manner of atrocities, I realized. Is that why the Kolshians are boarding us? Ralki, they could try to fly into Lern or Skalga under the UN banner. This ship had to go down before we allowed those monsters to have our resources at their disposal. Even if they didn't have anything so devious in mind, capturing a Terran craft for study would give them an edge at reverse engineering our latest advancements. It could also tip off some features of the Yodel vessels that we'd just raised from our shipyards. Suddenly, this mission had become less about forging ahead toward Alpha, and more about keeping our toys out of Kolshian possession. As much as I loathed those bastards, I couldn't deny this ambush was a clever way to turn the tables. Damn it, we need more, Samantha growled to herself, nigh inaudible, as the water ran dry. If you've got admin access to the right functions, Onso, trip the fire suppression system. I swiped at my holopad, abandoning the camera view for a moment. Done. You know, I love the ocean, but creating one inside the ship seems ill-advised. So dramatic. Acting like it's some torrential downpour that'll flood the whole craft. Well, drowning's pretty much the only lethal use for water. If that's not it, then fill me in on your plan. Or what? You'll give me puppy dog eyes? Maybe. It could be my new resting face. You have fun with that. You'll never crack me. Now cut the chatter. The human ducked into the maintenance shaft, and resealed the panel. Deciding to humor her request, I turned the fire sprinklers to full blast. Samantha had already climbed atop a pipe, gesturing for me to join her. She whispered something about keeping my limbs out of the water. I was growing more skeptical about her plan by the minute, so I decided to work on my own options in case this didn't pan out. The primate fetched the emergency supplies from a box on the wall, pulling out a defibrillator and bottles of water. She uncorked the liquid and spilled it onto the floor, mixing with the small pool seeping beneath the panel. I can't fathom what she's doing, so it's time to look for other avenues. There's no turrets by our current position, and there's Kolshians heading our way. The enemy likely would have swept any ducts or hiding spots regardless, but the water on the floor could tip them off to our presence at once. I balanced myself carefully on the pipe, where it was proving difficult not to crowd Samantha in the tight space. Her verdant eyes were glowing with delight, as well as a sense of pride. She peered over my shoulder at the camera feeds, tracking a group of about a dozen boarders as they drew closer. They had finished sweeping the airlock compartment, and were moving further down the hall toward us. All right. Here goes nothing. Samantha dropped the electrode pads into the water, and waited for an opportunity to pounce. I finally got an inkling of what she was trying to do, but there was no time to strike down this folly. Time to ride the lightning, fuckers. As confused Kolshians waded through the wet floor, the UN soldier triggered the shock button on the AED. Nothing happened. The life-saving device searched for a heartbeat signal and found none, preventing any shock from being rendered. Samantha scrunched her nose in confusion. I suspected the human anticipated more devastating consequences from the electric current. Amid a slew of muttered curses from Sam, the invading troops continued their search in progress, entirely unaware of the attempt. With the primate's plans yielding underwhelming results, I racked my brain for an alternative. A single holopad swipe led me back to the fire suppression system, where I workshopped the beginning of an idea. Firefighting foam was still available for deployment, according to the computer. My best idea for a defensive measure was to deploy the goo in full force in this hallway sector. The substance was a novelty compared to Federation ships, which only had overhead sprinklers and manual extinguishers if further flame retardants were needed. I recalled how ill-equipped Yodel were to ward off blazes when I was a child. Most roofs in Rinsa were thatched by our staple grain, or by wetland grasses, reeds, as humans referred to them. Those dry materials were quite flammable, which led to an infamous fire caused by Ralki's priests on Lern's largest continent of Thysun. The temples in Thysun were massive and superfluous. It was fitting that the twin villages of Kalster and Pyora were both caught up in a purification rite gone wrong, at the sacred ground that serviced both settlements. Our only technique to stop a blaze, prior to first contact, was using water pails kept on customary fire brigade hooks by our homes. Needless to say, that Ralkian ritual claimed dozens of lives and tenfold more buildings. It was only stopped via hasty demolition surrounding the inferno to starve it of fuel. The tragedy had been a humbling reminder of fire's raw power. If the humans devised something that could bury nature's exothermic killer, combustion that could claim entire neighborhoods, hoped it was good enough to encumber the Kolshians. I quieted my nerves, seeking a clear mind before leaping into action. With a few succinct swipes, firefighting foam was bucketed atop our tentacled foes, like shaving cream falling from the sky. Genuinely, it looked reminiscent of the goop I'd seen Tyler lather his face with, before running sharp blades atop of it. Humans were strange in more ways than one, but chopping off their own hair down to the root was special. Most species preferred not to grow their fur in clumpy patches. If I shaved off the fluff on my snout, I'd look like I went sniffing around in a wood chipper, minus the smattering of green blood that would entail, of course. My whiskers twitched with amusement, holding on to that mental image of my reflection. Sam bared her teeth with hostility. What's so funny? Something told me it would be suicidal to answer honestly. I switched over to the camera view on my holopad to show her my handiwork, rather than passing along my views on human grooming. Copious amounts of foam were clumped atop Kolshan soldiers, dripping down their envirosuits. The bubbly spray encroached on the viewing strips for their bulbous eyes, blinding them. Multiple enemies were pawing at their faces, struggling to wipe it away as more kept coming. I silently slid the maintenance panel open, and pressed myself flat on my stomach. This was as good of an opportunity as we'd get, this far away from the automated defenses. The primate also pressed herself prone on the ground, assessing her own target with her depth-perceiving eyes. My immediate assessment of distances was nowhere near a human's level, but it was good enough to get the job done. Focusing one eye down the sights of my pistol, I fired a shot into an enemy's center of mass. Samantha's synchronized bullet burst through another Kolshan's stomach like a xenomorph, a creature Tyler had giddily taught me about, spraying chunks of organs and violet blood onto a nearby compatriot. My breathing was purposeful and concentrated, as I calculated my every move. Don't let them catch their bearings. The enemy are caked in foam, unable to move fluidly or see where the shots are coming from. If they were other Federation soldiers, they would have already panicked. I wheeled my gun toward another target, and fired an instinctual shot with steady pause. My aim wasn't perfect, but it was enough to rend the tip of its tentacle clean off. The Kolshan's gun clattered to the ground, without two arms to grip it. Trusting that the maimed enemy couldn't fire back in the next few seconds, I searched for my next mark. Samantha was popping off shots one after the other. I tried not to register the last enemy she had hit, who was missing a clean chunk from the side of his skull. Swallowing the nausea that rose in my throat, I staved off jitters enough to shoot yet another foe near their heart. Our enemies couldn't return accurate fire without a visual. With our unconventional tactics, the Kolshans were falling into disarray. None of their training prepared them for a yodel twisting a human fire suppression system for nefarious purposes. The few hostiles that were left standing turned their guns in the direction of the gunfire, but the blind shots went at what would have been chest height, slamming into the wall above the access panel. A pawful of enemies, in their blind attempt to return fire, fumbled off shots that hit friendlies between them and us. I dished off several shots in quick succession, and with my newest expansion of their dead and wounded, the dazed boarders chose to stumble backward down the corridor. Samantha poked her slender arm out from our crawlspace, lobbing bullets after the hastily retreating, foam-drenched foes. The human chuckled to herself. "You're one deranged, coffee-loving yodel. I like you. I'm not deranged. My plan worked, while I think yours was made up by Tyler. Water is a poor conductor of electricity, so at low voltages, that was never going to be fatal," I rambled happily, swishing my tail. To shock someone to death, you need the contact area to be a large portion of the body's total surface area, and electricity entering through mucous membranes would also increase sensitivity. Have you been watching people get electrocuted and taking notes? No, I just think electrical currents are interesting. I understand more than most people think I do. I'm going to repeat this for the furthest planters in the fields. I'm a rocket scientist. The primate ducked out of the maintenance shaft, wrinkling her nose at the corpses. I'd treat you with the appropriate respect for that role if I hadn't seen you beg for food items multiple times today. Hey, you'd do it too if you could get away with it. I've seen you point at a remote on the other side of the couch and say that it's too far away. That's conserving energy, or just being comfy. That sounds an awful lot like lazy to me. You know I'm right, because you've looked into your heart and seen it to be true. Now that we've settled that important matter, what's our next move with the eye placement police? Huh, fuck, I guess that nickname fits the squids. Ass clowns can't even figure out directional eyes don't mean jack shit. Next, we find a proper place to hole up. Something tells me those Kolshans won't be back, and I say we've done our part. It's time to let our friends take care of the rest. I'd say it is. If the two of us could take on a squad with our wits alone, our friends can handle themselves. You know, I could be sitting at home, napping next to a Hensa or attending a stage play right now. Learn's being built back to something amazing. The Yodel do have less of a stick up your ass than other aliens. Learn's great by the sole factor of not having the Fed dies around anymore. And so, we all want to go home, free of this godforsaken war, so let's not fuck this up in the final lap. I have faith that we'll drive these borders out. We made fools of them, and we have to keep making fools of them all the way to Alpha. My claws tightened around my gun, recalling my own outrage toward the Federation. I'm just happy we've survived this bout up to now, with those numerical odds back there. After today, there's a few less of those bastards out there to owe us that debt. Eventually, we're going to make every Kolshan that partook in, or helped with this shit, pay for their crimes against sapience. But here and now, I just want them the fuck off our ship. Damn straight, Onso. This is our ship. Nobody takes what belongs to humanity, and lives to tell about it. From now on, that shit's going to be true about the Yodel too. Nobody fucks with either of our species. Thank you for sticking with me out here, Sam. The human grinned. It's been a pleasure, Brainiac. Having thwarted the Kolshan's attempts to flush us out in the ship's furthest reaches, I could only hope that UN personnel holed up in the bridge had found a crafty way to defend their position. There were dozens of boarders intruding on our warship, and we couldn't relax our guard until every last one of them was taken out. Like Samantha and I found mutual agreement over, humanity had no intention of letting the enemy succeed with this takeover. The push to Alpha might be slowed, but it wasn't going to be halted on our watch.